Well, hey there. Welcome back to the channel. I've got something to tell you. I've gone and done it again. I have indeed purchased yet another guitar. This is a Profile Super Strat from the 80s. Kind of a weird guitar. I got this super cheap used. I guess this is probably the cheap budget example of something that would be a solution to like a Charvel or a Jackson of the era. These came out, late 80s, early 90s. They were cheap, kind of an entryway to get yourself into a flashy finish and a flamboyant guitar. So I'm just going to give you a quick can review on this particular guitar that I just bought. And yeah, hopefully we can figure some stuff out because there doesn't seem to be a ton of information on this particular brand anywhere on the internet, which is really weird because the internet has everything. So let's see what we can find out. All right, so before we get into it, just a little bit of background information on this guitar here. So this obviously, as you can see on the headstock here, is a Profile guitar. Now there isn't a lot of information on Profile guitars out there, but what I can tell is that there was an organization based out of Montreal, Canada that looks like they owned the licensing to the Profile brand back in the 80s and the early 90s. Initially what they were doing was distributing Japanese-made guitars for a lot less money to compete with the bigger names like Charvel and Jackson and the like. Basically what they would do is they'd have whatever name they wanted printed on some stock guitars out of a factory, and then they would sell them in whichever market they chose, which in this case happened to be Canada. So anyway, the old Profiles seem to have all been made in Japan. I don't know which factory. If you know, let me know below. And the quality on those seems to have been pretty darn good for the amount of money you're paying. If I'm not mistaken, I've seen some people in forums say that they bought these things, new for like $130, $135 Canadian back then in the 80s. So there you go, cheap guitar. Basically, one thing that caught my attention when I bought this was just obviously the finish, but we'll talk about that later. But specifically, I was looking at the headstock. You guys can see this, right? So this says Profile on it. But I was thinking, okay, from what I sort of have been able to glean about this guitar, this was made for some distribution company that was selling, basically cheap versions of more expensive guitars. Perhaps there were other people doing the same thing in other markets, like in the States or in Australia, places like that. So I did a little bit digging. And here's what I found. What I can tell is that this was made in Korea in the late 80s, early 90s. But it looks like after production on Japanese cheaper guitars shifted to Korea as well, that you see other brands that look really similar to this. Ones that come to mind, headstocks of, say, a GTX guitar, which I think were called Cayman or Common Applause. And I've heard rumors that might have been some sort of outsourcing by Ovation Guitars. Not sure. If you know for sure, leave me a comment. And another one that I see on occasion in my local market here is a brand called El Degas. And similar story to these Profiles, the old El Degas models from the late 70s, early 80s were all made in Japan. And then somewhere in the mid-late 80s to early 90s, production seems to have shifted again to Korea. Seeing as how all these guitars are made in Korea in the late 80s, early 90s, that makes me think maybe there's some sort of connection to the factory which was turning out Samick guitars at that era. I'm sure everyone's probably played a couple Samicks in their day. No idea if this was the factory that was producing these, but they may have been. If anyone does know for sure which factory in South Korea was making these, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to know. Some curious coincidences, maybe correlations, and possibly one factory making all these different brands under one umbrella and just sticking whatever label you wanted on the headstock. I don't know. Anywho, information about this particular guitar that I bought. So this one is the Profile guitar, and according to the back here, it is a Profile Professional CF750RC. That is the model number, and you can't really see it here, but if you look on the back, it's pretty faded. That's how I know it was made in Korea, was this sticker here. It's mostly faded, but if you get it just right in the light, you can kind of make out where it says Korea. So that's how I know this was a Korean-made instrument. Now, I'm pretty sure that this guitar is a 1989 model. That's what the owner that I bought it from told me. And he led me to believe that he was the original owner of this. He was an older gentleman. I'm thinking he was probably holding it in his closet for many years. But he said it was an 89, and the serial number starts off with an 89. I have no idea if that's how these things were serialized, starting off with the first two digits of the year of production for that run. Not sure, but I mean, sort of makes sense, so we're gonna go with 89. Probably a 1989 Profile Professional CF750RC. What a dumb name. You know what this kind of reminds me of? It's like the new lineup of Ibanez's where it's just this big long number train. It's like, I don't know. Please, guitar companies, if you're listening, stop giving long numerical names to your guitars. Something simple that I can remember would be perfect and appreciated. Thanks a bunch. All right, the body. So, kind of the notorious thing about these guitars, people that remember these, Everybody, of course, remembers that these were really cheap, they're inexpensive, and the quality on them wasn't particularly good. But from what I understand, you're not paying a lot of money for that, so you're still getting a pretty attractive instrument. And who really cares about the rest, right? You can change these things. So the reason I bought this, obviously, was for this body. This is obviously a Super Strat, but look at this crackle finish. You guys seeing this? This is super cool. Actually, this one I really like. I don't know if the camera's gonna pick it up. Right here, you can see it's kind of faded. It's kind of giving it like a grayish 3D look. I don't know if they came like this fresh out of the factory or if this is just doing it because this thing is ancient. It does it all over the place. But I thought that was super neat. I've got a few crackle guitars and none of them quite look this way. And again, this was a cheap guitar, so I couldn't pass up on the epic deal for really cool, well-painted guitar. That's one thing I gotta say. This is pretty well painted, like compared to some other guitars I own. I mean, I'm not seeing any blemishes or anything in the paint. I got a couple dings and scratches here and there, but I mean, that's to be expected. If this guitar was made in '89, you know, we're looking at an instrument that's over 30 years old, so it's probably seen some action. But yeah, I really like this paint job. I think it's a really nice crackle, and again, affordable. Also worth mentioning, the body's got, you know, your standard shred guitar features, like right here you've got a bit of a cut for access up to that, you know, 22nd fret if you need it. On the back here we've got a nice belly cut, which is quite comfortable. And of course, the standard cutaway here for your arm. So pretty much the kind of standard stuff you'd find on really just any Super Strat of the 80s. Now, as far as the wood used in a guitar like this, of course, being a discount shred machine of the 80s, this is not a solid body. I mean, it's a solid body in the sense it's not a hollow body guitar, but what I mean is that the guitar itself, this construction, isn't like maple or mahogany or anything like that. This is good old plywood. And you know how I know that? If you flip it over, see if I can get in there. You can see these rings. See these little rings here? 1, 2, 3. Well, it's not really rings. What you're looking at is sandwiches of different plies. That's how they stick all the wood together and glue it before they cut it like this. So this is how you keep the cost down. And I must say, it keeps the guitar pretty light and firm and, you know, structurally sound. So this is a plywood guitar. Now, a lot of people, of course, associate a plywood guitar with a bad guitar. And I'm not sure if that's exactly true. I mean, we'll play this thing later and try to determine that for ourselves, but I'm thinking of other brands that have done plywood guitars, which are certainly not cheap. The Gibson Zoot Suit range of guitars comes to mind immediately. Those are plywood. They sound great. They look ridiculous, and they are certainly anything but cheap. I have no idea what they're going for these days. Last time I checked up on them, used, they were selling for over $2,500. I don't know if that's changed much now, but definitely not a cheap guitar, and it's plywood. So, good enough for Gibson. Perhaps this isn't such a bad thing. I don't know. All right, we should probably chit-chat about this neck. So aside from the headstock, which has some striking similarities to a few other brands around this same time, the neck itself feels pretty good. It reminds me a lot of my Jacksons, but thicker. So it's still quite thin. Like, this is a very shreddy neck. No idea what the radius is on this, although I will say it's quite flat. I don't think it's compound radius. I'd be surprised if we got that on a guitar that was around $150 new. But you know, it's a pretty flat fingerboard, and the contour back here it's a nice rounded shape. Like, you could probably play this for quite some time without your hand getting overly fatigued or cramped. Again, it doesn't feel quite like any of my Kramers, but it reminds me a bit of my Jacksons, just a little bit thicker. In a good way, really. The construction itself, of course, you're looking at what I'm going to assume is maple. Looks like maple to me on the back here of the neck, pretty standard. Looks like a rosewood fingerboard. And actually, I got lucky with this one. As you can see, there's still quite a bit of fret life left in this thing, despite being over 30 years old. Of course, if you look on the back here, you can see that the headstock is put together using many different pieces of wood. Again, this was an inexpensive guitar, but that doesn't really throw me off too much with it. You see this on a lot of other brands too around this era. I've definitely seen some BC Riches which weren't particularly cheap with headstocks like this. I've even seen Jacksons like this as well, which are a little bit more dear, you know, going all the way up into the early 2000s. So again, not a deal breaker for me. As long as everything's glued in there nice and tight, it's perfectly fine. And it doesn't really matter anyway. I mean, this is a locking trem system guitar. As long as this is one solid piece here, we're not going to get much movement. Things are going to be nice and stable. And of course, as you've probably already guessed, the neck itself is the regular 25.5 inch Fender scale length, and you have 22 frets. The fret size themselves, they're fairly large. I don't know if these are jumbo or medium jumbo, but they're not thin frets by any stretch. But overall, quite nice. Oh, also worth mentioning, the tuners themselves are just plain, basic, unbranded tuners. They don't really matter, but again, we're talking about a lock nut here, so these aren't really too important. Once this is locked, fine tuners will be doing all the work anyway. So yeah, on a cheap guitar, you can definitely go the inexpensive route back here, and it's not really a concern. I probably won't change these. So yeah, the neck feels pretty good. Looks pretty good. It's pretty flat. I like it. One thing I do want to mention about this guitar is the bridge. Now, I don't know if you guys can see this bridge here. This is basically a single locking bridge, and what I mean by that is we've got a lock nut up here, and then you can also see that it has a regular nut in front of the lock nut. You see this a lot in guitars from like the early and mid 80s, and then some of these more affordable guitars in the late 80s. This still works fine. Just you got to make sure, of course, when you're doing anything with these, that you lube up this nut here with like some nut sauce or graphite or something, just to try and get your strings to move when you're bending and things, so they don't get caught up in this nut. That's a friction point, of course, which you want to try and mitigate as much as possible. But I don't mind this kind of setup. A lot of people don't like it. I've had quite a few guitars with the lock nut behind a regular nut. Have worked really well for me, which is saying quite a bit because I'm normally quite an idiot with a bar. I'm just one of those people where if I get lost on the fretboard anywhere and I'm live, it's just dive bombs away and have a nice day. All right. But I digress. The bridge. So basically, we're looking at a single locking bridge. So locks the nut. Back here it does not lock, meaning that if you look right here, I don't know if you guys can see this. Let me move this bar out of the way. These little holes here, this is where you feed your strings through, and then they come up through here, and of course you put them around the pegs like you would normally, and so they don't lock. And the interesting thing about this, which I thought was kind of a clever design, is if you're looking at this plate here, this is how they use the fine tuners to make the adjustments by moving on this plate. There's no leaf spring underneath like you would normally see in something like a Floyd Rose. Instead they're using a solid piece of steel, just this. It's a really simple design, which is kind of clever in the sense that these were probably incredibly cheap to manufacture. Now again, talking about things that are incredibly cheap to manufacture, the quality of this bridge is quite indeed garbage. This is cheap steel. It looks pretty good from afar, but I don't think this is going to play too well once we get into it. But we'll find out later. One thing I will say about this bridge though, despite being a very interesting design, which initially looks kind of clever, the steel is cheap and overall this design does not work. This thing does not stay in tune. You're going to notice when I play this at all, I will not touch this trem. I will not touch that bar because this whole thing will be out of tune super quick and sound super bad. So yeah, let's not even talk about that aside from what we just discussed. There's a bridge. Think of it as something that's there for show. As long as you don't touch that bar, things should be okay. All right, so just how terrible is this bridge? Let me demonstrate. Currently we're in tune. Right? Okay, watch this. All right, the electronics. So I kind of like the way this is set up. So obviously this is a hum single. The neat thing is we have toggle switches. I love toggle switches. These are so freaking 80s. So basically we've got, down position is on for neck, off, on for middle, off. This one's really cool though. For the bridge, down all the way, humbucker, middle is off, up all the way, split coil. I mean, that's a pretty nice feature for a cheap guitar. A lot of new guitars don't come with that kind of feature. Anyway, the pickups themselves, these are all branded Profile, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I do not like these pickups. They sound pretty terrible. I'm usually more of the school of thought that a decent pickup with a decent amp and a guitar that's set up pretty well should sound pretty okay. These sound muddy and garbage-like, so I'm going to do a little bit of a playthrough with these, just some open chords so you guys can kind of hear the way they sound. I'll do a bit more of a riff kind of songy deal at the end here using the bridge pickup with some leads over it so you can kind of get a sense for these pickups, but I'm going to tell you right now, these are not long for this world. I hate these. They sound like shit. Anyway, tones, let's go. All right, tones, everything's off. We're just gonna do some clean tones to my Red Voodoo here, nothing too crazy. Let me just flick on the neck. So we're just gonna do an E minor 7 here. That's your neck pickup, kind of lifeless. Pretty boring. But that's it. Here's neck middle. I don't know if you can hear this, but these pickups are kind of hummy. It's more obvious when you've just got one of them on, but they don't sound particularly good. All right, middle pickup. Okay, enough of that. That sounds kind of like crap too. Let's do the bridge. Yeah, that's a bridge, all right. Still sounds like a bridge. Still sounds like a bridge. Yes, that's full humbucker. Let's split that, see if that makes any difference. Oh wow, that actually makes a huge difference. Yeah, somebody might like those sounds. I'm not overly crazy about that. So there you go, those are the pickups. I find that these are quite noisy, especially if you've got the volume jacked up. You're gonna get a lot of hum and just weird microphonic sounds off of them that I really don't like. So like I said earlier, these pickups probably won't stay in this guitar for long. I just don't like them. And that's saying something. I normally like just about every pickup. It has to be a particularly crap pickup for me to really dislike the sound of it. But I find these to be kind of lifeless to my ear. Yeah, so there's that. But again, the guitar's cheap. And look at that paint, it's beautiful. All right, let's do something in more of a kind of distorted rocky context. I'm gonna do all this just back here on the bridge, and I'll do just a riff of a popular song and maybe a solo, and that should kind of give you an idea of what this kind of sounds like in its stock format. All right, let's go. Alright, so that's it. That's my review of the Profile Professional CF750 RC Classic Shred Guitar. Cheap thing from the 80s with a really nice paint job. Again, I don't mind this guitar. I like the neck. It feels pretty good. It's comfortable. The playability on it's alright as long as you don't touch this abomination of a bridge. Stay away from this thing. It's horrible. Yeah, and like, I mean, just look at this paint. Again, look at the paint. I think I paid $135 for this. This is crazy, gorgeous paint for that kind of money. I can't paint something like this. So you know what? I'm probably going to hang on to this. What I'm thinking is perhaps if I switch out these electronics, maybe to something a little bit better, I'll see if I can find a solution to this bridge. Maybe I'll deck it so it's just dive only and see if that improves anything. That might make this a really nice budget little shredder. So yeah, I'll keep you posted if I do any of that. Hopefully I will. Because again, I kind of like this guitar. It's a nice cheap guitar to hack around on, and didn't cost me much. And I love cheap thrills. Who doesn't like cheap thrills? But anyway, that's it. That's all I got for you guys today. If you liked the video and learned anything or found this informative or helpful in any way, please make sure you leave me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you've played one of these or something similar from one of those other brands we were talking about, please leave me a comment below. Let me know what your experience with this particular guitar or a similar one was. And yeah, that's all I really got to say about this thing for now. Again, I'm going to keep it. I might do some mods, and maybe I'll make a video about that. Anywho, until next time, keep on shredding, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.